Let's look at the basics of creating and setting up audio tracks. Now, we do it from the same Add Tracks window that we saw for instruments, so we can get to it from the track menu or with this plus button or with the T key command. And we have this Add Tracks window. So I'm going to name it something for now. I'm going to call it Cowbell. And the type of track is audio. And that'll come up with whatever your most recent selection is when you hit the T key. And I used audio last, so that's what showed up. But you can check from this menu and select what you want. And as we saw before, we can create multiple tracks at once if we want, and we can color it manually. Maybe I'll choose a different color, or we can auto color it. We can choose if we want a mono or stereo track. I'm going to go with mono for the moment. And we can choose a preset for processing on the track. And there are a variety of factory presets that ship with, and you can, of course, create and save your own. But for now, I'm not going to call up any presets on it, so I'll go with no preset. And here we can set the input. And you'll recall when we set up our I/O setup, I named everything, so I see all the names here. I'm going to leave it with my VO mic for the moment. And we can output to, again, what we've set up in our audio setup. And I have my main outputs or the two headphones that I set up. I'm just going to leave it like that. And if we create multiple tracks, let's say I wanted to create 4, we can set this to ascending and it'll be set up with ascending inputs. Like, for example, if I was going to record my drum kit and I wanted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I could select that, put that to 5, and then click ascending, and they'll all get created with ascending inputs. Let me do that real quick to show you. So there we go. And if we look, I'm going to hit F4 to call up the inspector. We can look at the inputs. We can resize here. And if I select this first one, we'll see that that's overhead L, that's overhead R, kick, snare, and hi-hat. So those were all done automatically. I'm going to hit Command-Z to undo, and we're back to our regular setup. And I'm going to hit T again to bring this up. So I'm going to leave this at 1 track for the moment, and mono, and just the VO mic. And that's irrelevant in this case because there's only 1 mic. And we can do the same thing with outputs. If you're working with multiple output interfaces and you want cascading outputs, it's the same thing. So I'm going to click OK. So that's done. Now, another thing we can do is we can right-click directly in the track column here, and I can create an audio or stereo track by default, so I don't need to go through that new tracks or add tracks dialog box. I can create one directly there as I can with the instrument track. So I can say create a new stereo track. I'm just going to hit Command-Z to undo. And we can also go up to the track menu and directly from here create specifically a mono or stereo audio track or an instrument track. So let's say I'm going to create another mono audio track from there, and I want to reconfigure the inputs or outputs. Well, we can get to the audio track's input and output assignment from 3 places. We can do it in the track column here. When I drag this wider, we can see the input here, and I can select another one if I decide I want to change it. And I can even use the format button here if I want to change this to stereo. The 2 circles indicate stereo, and then I have the input 1, 2, which I left defined in my I/O setup, but those are the only stereo inputs I have defined. I can define more if I want, but I'll leave it at mono for now. Now, when we're in the inspector, and again, F4 will toggle that, or we can use this I button, we can resize this and get to the fields that are necessary here. So I can set up my input there, and my custom names appear there as well as expected, and I can set the output here. And the third place is in the console. So I'm going to hit F3, which is the console view or mixer view. And here as well, we have the input field and then the output field. Now I'm going to right click here and create a new stereo track. And in the input field, again, we can get this from any of the 3 places. I'll go here for now. You'll notice that instrument output, bus, and rewire channels can also be selected as the input for these stereo tracks. So we can re-record, for example, the bass or the bells. If I want to record that as audio, I can select that as the input here. And no buses or rewire channels exist at the moment, but the same goes for those. Now, I want to talk for a moment about the 3 different tempo modes that we have available for audio tracks. We have Don't Follow, Follow, and Time Stretch. Now, when Don't Follow is selected, when we record audio, they're going to be unaffected by song tempo. So when we change the tempo, it just remains and plays back as it was recorded. When Follow is on, as this is now, then the start position of the audio on the selected track is adjusted with any tempo changes so that the events are going to stay in sync with the bars and beats. So the overall length of what we call the event, which is the audio that's recorded, the audio event, won't be changed, but the beginning will stay in sync. Now, time stretch, the third option, does everything. If there's tempo changes in the song, it'll cause the audio on the track to dynamically stretch to fit the event's start and end times so that it stays in sync with the bars and beats. So if I record a drum groove or a cowbell groove for 2 bars and then change the tempo, it'll still be 2 bars long and remain in sync at the new tempo. And we have different time stretch algorithms depending on what we're working with, but we'll explore those later. Now, when we're creating new songs, I'm going to hit Command N to bring up the new song window. You'll notice that in addition to naming it and setting these parameters, we also have stretch audio files to song tempo. And if we check that on when we're creating new songs, then all newly created audio tracks by default are going to be set with time stretch enabled here. Now, you can always switch these manually, but it's a way of, by default, having that assigned to new tracks. We'll continue with more in the next video.